All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church, building community, inspiring growth, creating change. Here in the heart of Kansas City, we come together to create this hour of shared reflection so that we might be renewed in courage for these times and inspired to lives of greater dignity, higher purpose, deeper generosity, and more effective action. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism or to our congregation, we want to get to know you and share a part of your journey. If this place is already your spiritual home, welcome once more. We need one another, and it is good to be together again. Through the gifts of technology, we also gather virtually to celebrate community and connections as we lean into the values of justice, compassion, and reason. Welcome to all those who are joining us in this way today. Together, we learn the love that has the power to overcome both loneliness in the heart and oppression in the world. Welcome to our service this morning. May the words and music and images that we offer today nourish our best selves, calling forth abundant wisdom and love.
Arise, O souls, arise.
Good morning. I'm Beth Andes, a member of All Souls, and we are so glad that you're here with us today or joining us online. This Memorial Day weekend, we honor our ancestors and loved ones who are no longer with us in body. Now, we have the pleasure of recognizing those visiting us for the first time. If you are a first-time visitor, please stand or raise your hand. Our ushers have a gift for you, so please wait to sit down or lower your hand until after you've received it. Do we have any first-time visitors? All right. Oh, someone's being outed. Awesome. Keep your hand up, sir. Thank you. All right. You are welcome here with all of the identities that you hold and in your fullness as a person. We hope that you bring your whole self to this time together. This morning we had the final form for this fiscal year, and next Sunday we begin the Summer Odysseys, same time, same station, 9:30 in Conover, where your fellow congregants share their life stories and spiritual journeys. Please join us. There are always fascinating pieces of personal history you would otherwise never know about. Talk to me or David Black after the service if you wish to participate as a presenter. We're down to only 3 slots, so if you're thinking about it, do it soon. Welcome.
This is a call for all the people longing for liberation, all who wander too often the desert, not sure of the way forward, too often thirsty and afraid, looking for water. Here was a call to collect ourselves and the hopes we have tucked away, set aside too often for another day. Here, we are building a welcome table that never finds its end. There is nothing tidy or perfect possible in this journey. Abundant life is messy and glorious, filled with risk. This is a call for the diving in with all the dreams of your heart, the struggles, the hunger, the courage, the community, the love. Here we remember the time for joy is always now. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning. My name is Sierra, and I light this chalice for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
Thank you, Sierra. Please stand as you are willing and able and join in the affirmation of our covenant, and then remain standing as we join together in song. Together, we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Briefly about this hymn, because most of us here don't have a deep, soul-rooted sense of what it means not to be free in the legal and physical generation in chains meaning. So as we sing this song from the Black tradition, know that it was not written from that period of legal enslavement, but rather in New York City in the late 60s by Jasmine Billy Taylor. In 2010, Natalie Cole sang it at the White House, which is to say that the longing and struggle for freedom never ends. It's always in process, must always engage all of us as we yearn to understand and break those chains holding all of us caught in the legacy of oppression.
I'd sing 'cause I know how it feels to
Do we have any children here this morning that would like to come forward? Or you could stay in your seat. And we'll hear this story. It's not actually The Stranger and the Trunk. This is called The Hunter and the Birds. And it's from an old Indian, that is East Indian tradition. So, long, long ago, there was an enormous jungle. It was gleaming with colorful plants and flowers and dense with wildlife. There was also a wise and powerful fairy who took care of all the birds and animals in the jungle. Well, one day she was flying around in the jungle and she came near this tree, the home of a flock of birds. And she noticed there was a tiny climbing vine growing at the foot of the tree. She got worried, and she called out to the birds, "Look, listen, friends, can you see that little plant growing on the tree? Get rid of it right now. If you don't, it will grow and encircle your tree, and the hunters might be able to climb up and catch you." The birds ignored her warning. "The plant is so small and it looks harmless. How could a hunter get up here with that?" said one of the birds. "Cut it down now," said the fairy. "Later it will become as hard as rope, and then you won't be able to cut it." Okay, but not today. We're busy gathering brush for our nests and worms for the little ones." And the fairy was disappointed. That's what a disappointed fairy looks like, and flew away. And as time went on, the climbing vines started growing stronger and stronger till it encircled that tree completely. One day, all the birds went out in search of food, and a hunter came near the tree with a net rolled onto his shoulder. He looked at the tree and saw signs of birds on the ground. He looked up at the tree. Aha! There should be a lot of birds in this tree. I can catch them, said the hunter. But how? It's a pretty tall tree. Then he spotted the climbing vine on the tree and thought, perfect. I can use this vine as my rope and climb up this tall tree. So using the vine, he climbed up the tree and he discovered the bird's home. Uh-oh. Hooray, I got it. So this is the place where the birds hide. Let me spread my net to catch them, said the hunter. He spread his net on the tree to catch the birds. And the hunter then climbed down from the tree. I'll come tomorrow and check if the birds get caught here, said the hunter, and he went back home. That evening, the birds came back to their nests, holding their food in their beaks. They approached the tree unaware of the trap. They flew straight into the hunter's net and got caught. Help, help, somebody help us. The hunter has trapped us. Help, help, screamed the birds. They fluttered their wings desperately, trying to get free, but to no avail. Just then the fairy heard their cries and came flying to the tree. Oh no, she said, the hunter has trapped you in the tree, in the net. And then she said just what nobody should ever say. I warned you to cut that plant, but you didn't listen. One of the birds replied, sorry, fairy, you warned us twice, but we didn't listen to you. Each one of us thought the other one would do it. Nobody did it. What shall we do now? We're all trapped. How do we get free from this net? Please, please help us. The fairy came closer to the birds and whispered something. What? Are you joking? Cried one of the birds. If we could fly with this heavy net, why would we be asking you for your help? And one of the biggest and strongest birds tried to fly alone, but he couldn't move. "I told you it's not possible," said his mate. Another thing that no one should ever say. The fairy looked at them a little impatiently and said, "Do exactly as I said, all of you. Fly away with the net together. In order to get free and away from the hunter, you all have to fly up together, clutching the net in your beaks. Together you'll be strong enough and can fly away, and that is the only way to freedom." So each bird picked up a portion of the huge net, and they flew up and away together, carrying the net with them. The hunter was surprised to see the birds flying along with his net. He ran after the birds, shouting madly, but couldn't catch them. And soon they flew over the hills and valleys, getting out of his sight. And when the birds saw that the hunter had given up the chase, the oldest and wisest said, "Now we all have to get out of this net. A community of mice lives on the nearby hill. Let's go to them for help." They flew to a hill near the city of temples where the mice lived. And when the mice heard the loud noise of the birds' approach, they got frightened and hid themselves deeper into their holes. But then the head mouse came out of the hole and saw the birds landing and cried, "Everyone, come out fast. There's an emergency. Our friends are in danger and we all need to help them." The mice immediately started nibbling the net, and together, all the birds were set free. They thanked the mice for helping them and leaving behind the mouse-eaten net, but taking with them the lessons they'd learned. The birds set off together in search of a new land to build a beloved bird community. The end. Bring the children to their classes.
Morning. I'm Bonnie Postlethwaite. I'm the president of the Board of Trustees. This weekend, Americans honor the many men and women who died in military service to our country to preserve our democracy, our rights, and our freedom. When I think about the service that UUs have given to these same causes, I think of the ultimate sacrifice in Selma, Alabama, that James Reeb made in the Civil Rights Movement. I think of all the men and women in the Unitarian Service Committee who put their lives at risk to rescue and provide relief to Jews and other anti-Nazi individuals during World War II. There are so many other examples. I am proud that this congregation voted last week to adopt the 8th principle and recently created the Justice Action Network to continue carrying on the fight for justice in our own city. This work will take the generosity of us all. I hope today you will consider a modest donation of your time and treasure compared to what others before us have given. Please consider making or increasing your pledge and or giving generously when the basket is passed, or you can do it online, so that we have the resources to do this work. Today's offering will go to the General Operating Fund and will now be gratefully received. Please join me in dedicating this offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
Good morning. Our first reading is from a recent New York Times Magazine article by Dr. Orna Guralnek. Some of you might recognize her name from the Showtime series Couples Therapy. She's the star therapist. It's called I'm a Couples Therapist. Something new is happening in relationships. One afternoon in 2020, early in the pandemic, I met Sil Violet and Matthew for a virtual session. Sil Violet is a vivacious essayist and spoken word poet, and she was trying to describe how she felt Matthew, a measured medical student, was trying to control her, in this case by trying to dissuade her from buying a slushie. He thought they should keep to a tight budget until after he became a doctor and achieved financial stability. So Violet found his reasoning maddening, especially since he seemed to imply she was reckless. Now, on the face of it, this fight seems insignificant. But then an exchange took place that changed the tenor of the argument, connecting us to the underlying roots of the issue. I have trouble envisioning that finish line, Sil Violet exclaimed, tearing up, because the plan he's talking about, my life has always been the plan never works. And for a moment, Matthew continued to try to reason with her and convince her of his sound financial strategy. I know that sounds very conceited, cocky, he said, to which Sil Violet whipped back, no, it sounds privileged. She described her family's relationship to money. They had basically nothing but trauma for generations. So Violet resented Matthew's pride in his plan. A privileged setting gave you access to all these things, she said. You've taken ownership over it, like I did it according to plan. As if other people just did it according to plan, it would work out. With the mention of the word privilege, Matthew came along to realizing they were talking about forces larger than themselves. Each of them was African American, but he came from a financially stable family. His parents were a firefighter and a bank manager. They followed a middle-class trajectory. They did well. As the relevance of class and race came into focus, Sil Violet's rage transformed into deep sorrow, generations of poverty weighing heavily on her. I just wish I could believe what you believe, she told Matthew. One of the most difficult challenges for couples is getting them to see beyond their own entrenched perspective. It's quite a difficult psychological position. This requires humility and the courage to tolerate uncertainty. Grasping that our views are contingent on, let's say, our gender, our class, background, skin color, it's a humbling lesson. It pushes us beyond assuming sameness. I've been working as a psychologist since the mid-1990s, and in the past 8 years or so, I've witnessed a tremendous change in the kinds of conversations couples can have. Recent events have reshaped the national conversation on power, privilege, gender norms, whiteness, systemic racism. Together, these ideas have pushed us to think, talk, argue, and become aware of the many implicit biases we all carry about our identities, unconscious assumptions that privilege some and inflict harm on others. There has, of course, been ferocious pushback against many of these ideas, claims that they're divisive or exclusionary. But in my practice, at least, I've found that engaging with these progressive movements has led to deep changes in our psyches. My patients, regardless of political affiliation, are incorporating these messages of social movements into the very structure of their being. As a collective, we appear to be coming around to the idea that bigger social forces run through all of us, animating us, pitting us against one another, whatever our conscious intentions may be. To invert a truism, the political is personal.
The Inward Work of Democracy by Jacob Needleman. There were some German mystical communities that came to America before the Revolution. They brought a spiritual vision of community. I think we need to rediscover what that was all about. It's that everyone is equal under God, and that means deep down in the human essence, we all are part of some common greatness that we need to respect in each other and rediscover in ourselves. The paradox of true individuality is that the more you are in touch with what all human beings have in common under God, the more you are uniquely what you yourself are. And that's why I say we need to bring back the obligations that go along with the rights in order to understand the depths of what the human rights really mean. It's become so trivialized, freedom. It's wonderful to be able to go where I want to go, what I want to buy, what I want to do, what I want to buy, get, and talk. I have no constraints. We certainly need external liberty. Without that, the rest is just academic. But without the inner meaning of freedom, we have to ask, well, what's this freedom for? It's not just a freedom to get a big house, a big car, and a lot of goods. So inner freedom is an idea that has gone out of our conversation. Inner freedom means inwardly to be free from these egoistic, selfish cravings which make our life turn around into chaos. It's an interior freedom, which maybe you can say is mystical or certainly spiritual, but without that dimension to the idea of freedom, the idea of freedom becomes purely external and eventually selfish. And the point is really that we are free to search. We have the liberty to gather together in communities, to study, to work, to find our own relationship to the spirit of conscience, which is what makes a human being really a moral and free human being.
It's almost 10 years ago now that a member of the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Lawrence, Kansas, where I was serving as minister, asked me if I was interested in attending a workshop, a weekend workshop of the Visiting Scholar program at Village Presbyterian Church in Prairie Village. And I certainly was, because the speaker was John Dominic Crossan, who's a former Catholic priest and professor of theology, author of over 30 books about the origins of Christianity, and he's generally regarded as one of the world's leading scholars on the historical Jesus. So I'd been reading his book called How the West Lost and the East Kept the Original Easter Vision, which was to be the subject of his presentation. I was, and I still am, intrigued by his insights about the metaphors and the symbolism in that resurrection story, which he insists is not to be understood literally, but is about liberation from the fear of death, and all that is not life-affirming. And this is the foundational story of Christianity, the whole point, if you will, which informs so much of our belief about life in Western civilization, whether we accept or reject the theology. It's our psychological DNA. And Crossan was speaking to a major discrepancy between these literally iconic Eastern and Western images of resurrection. And how he came about this realization was especially fascinating. It began as he was on a tour of Turkey to study Paul. And in the process of going through ancient churches, he began to notice what seemed to him some very weird, that's the word he used, weird, images of the resurrection. Images that were necessarily created from artist concepts about what the church believed at that time, because these scenes were nowhere described in the Gospels. So, in the West, we see Jesus rising from his tomb all alone, or as Crossan says, looking a little bit like an athlete coming out well buffed from the gym. But not in the East. Everywhere he traveled, in ancient churches in Turkey, Russia, Egypt, Romania, he saw something very different. While Western Christianity has a very individualistic vision of Jesus arising glorious and triumphant, but also all by himself, look at one of the best examples of the Eastern vision. This is from a 4th century church in Istanbul. It's the vision of Jesus breaking down the gates of hell, which there are old locks and chains lying at his feet, and pulling all of humanity out together, symbolized here by Adam and Eve, and coming out from a crowd. There was a time, says Crossan, when this was the only Christian tradition, keeping continuity with Jewish tradition better than the West, which changed this vision to one of individual resurrection. And there are some similarities here to our Universalist Christian roots, the belief that all souls are saved from hell, at least eventually. But I think this goes that one better, that humanity needs saving, and that is not an individual proposition. None of us are free until all of us are free, liberated together from all that imprisons us. And DNA being the enduring element that it is, even the psychological version, I think it's no coincidence that these two very different visions of freedom are something that we struggle with in America, at least in America, maybe elsewhere, but today where the Western version obviously prevails. We struggle with it, but for the most part, we don't name it as such. So what an intriguing and maybe hopeful development that a few weeks ago, President Biden focused on exactly this as he announced his candidacy for the 2024 election. We need to have a national conversation about the meaning of freedom, he said. It was pretty clear what he meant as he went on to set forth his idea of basic bedrock freedoms. The freedom for women to make their own health care decisions. He didn't say it, but let's add transgender people to that list. The freedom for our children to be safe from gun violence. Let's add all of us to that. The freedom for seniors to live with dignity. Again, that should be everybody. The freedom to vote and have your vote counted. And he said, to give every American the freedom that comes with a fair shot at building a good life. He said every American, but I'm pretty sure he meant everyone among us, regardless of nationality. And it's an intriguing political strategy, as polls show that pretty much all Americans of every political opinion place a high, very high value on freedom. Undefined, as I guess it's presumed we all know what freedom is. But as far as politics are concerned, for all my adult life, say ever since the Civil Rights Movement, the glorification of the ideal of freedom seems to have come from those who opposed most of those bedrock freedoms President Biden mentioned. On the progressive side, we've framed our beliefs and highest values in terms of not freedom, but justice, equality, democracy, community, solidarity. So that culturally and politically speaking, freedom in America has come to be associated with low taxes, minimal business regulation, the right to own as many guns as you want, the right to decide what ideas your kids and apparently everyone else's gets to be exposed to in our public schools, the right not to pay any money to anyone else's health care, the right to put other people's lives at risk by refusing vaccination, all individual rights that cause profound damage to the well-being of our community. And the conversation in the larger society about freedom is also occurring within Unitarian Universalism as we continue the anti-racism, anti-oppression work, as we increasingly center freedom as essential to our living tradition in this country. And I want to say here how profoundly grateful and proud I felt as a member of All Souls of this, my home congregation that ordained me into ministry, when we overwhelmingly voted to adopt the 8th principle at our annual meeting last Sunday. And I'm privileged to be here in your pulpit to say that to you this first Sunday following that affirmation. Thank you. And to everybody that worked so hard on it. For Unitarian Universalism, this commitment to a new day of anti-oppression work has been a long time coming. Already in the year 2000, when I first started my seminary education, our 2 UU seminaries and the ministerial credentialing process were deeply committed to this vision. The acknowledgement of systemic racism, of white supremacy culture in our country and its institutions, including UU institutions necessarily, had started to shift, would continue to evolve in ways that called for a change of consciousness. Yes, we were still being called to advocate, to contribute resources, to participate in protests, to preach and teach and send letters and write blogs and vote and organize, all that, yes. But now, the purpose of our anti-oppression work was not only to help fix problems, rather we are called to the work of dismantling systems of oppression. Systems in which the vast majority of our leaders and members and institutions benefit in varying degrees because of our place in that system. So it behooves us to ask not how do the traditionally privileged help the traditionally oppressed, but rather what will it take for all of us to be free from these systems? On the larger American cultural and political stage, whether it's about transphobia, homophobia, racism, misogyny, ableism, xenophobia, we continue to be confronted with the reality that changes of consciousness and commitments to help create change are not an easy ask, even among people whose worldview is nominally progressive. And that's true within Unitarian Universalism as well, because why wouldn't it be? In many ways, we're a microcosm of that progressive segment of America. And we are extraordinarily lucky in this opportunity we've been granted. It's come about because after decades of Black UUs or former UUs, lay people and clergy stepping up to do the painful emotional labor of speaking out about the many ways they've felt marginalized or excluded in our congregations and within the UUA, we, that is to say, growing numbers of our leaders and members, finally stopped dismissing those voices as wrong about their own lived experiences, and began to listen and believe and respond. And when I say we're lucky, it's because growing numbers of these UUs, many of them young and determined, have decided to stay and to hold this movement accountable, to live into our stated values and principles. Every year when I attend our National General Assembly, I'm so encouraged to see more and more younger people of color actively participating and more in leadership positions. And just this week, I heard that, based on anecdotal information, it's believed that Unitarian Universalism might currently have more ministers who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color serving as interims than any other faith tradition. That is huge. It doesn't come without pain. I tell you with a great sense of sorrow, there have been claims that to accept this gift, to believe the stories of marginalized UUs, to accept their lived experience as evidence of a culture of white supremacy at work within our institutions, however unintentionally, because again, how could it not be there, is not rational, is not based on reason. That the call to decenter whiteness after more than 2 centuries of centered whiteness is discriminatory. And so one longtime UU leader, white, straight, male, boomer, all of which seems that it could be relevant here, has written, speaking to our newly evolving commitment to freedom and anti-oppressive freedom, too much equality can result in an oppressive society. To this, I have 2 responses. First, oppressive for whom? And second, yes, that statement could be true, depending on how you understand freedom. How do we understand freedom? Freedom isn't free, says the familiar, quintessentially American bumper sticker that often becomes more visible during times of crisis, calling for military action. But that's only one way that freedom isn't free. Here is a hard truth. None of us knows what it will take, what sacrifices it could require to dismantle systems of oppression so that all might be free. Not only do we not know the answers, We are just beginning to understand some of the questions. And as Unitarian Universalists in this Kansas City metro community, we have a real opportunity and an incredible challenge as we commit to doing anti-racism work. Most of us don't know the history of the past century here that have left us with segregated neighborhoods, resegregated public schools, and a tremendous increase in violence affecting mostly the Black community. I've lived here for 70 years. I'm a product of the Kansas City public school system, and I've just begun to understand that history and its effect on shaping me. I've hardly begun to understand the implications of its effect on the community as we live in it today. But I sense that there are some profoundly disturbing elephants in the room, and questions that, if we knew and understood, might be just too scary to engage. Because what then? Whatever I think I understand now about dismantling systems of oppression in our city, it's the result of not only the privilege of my Unitarian Universalist seminary education and years of ministry, but also, and I think most significantly, a couple of heartbreakingly paradigm-shattering moments that happened pretty close to home. One about 10 years ago and one in 2019. That most recent one involves the high school I attended in the 60s, Southwest. And though I'm sure now a few of you are very curious, I have to leave that story for another time. But I mention it now just to say it's one of many gut-wrenching elements of our little-known urban history that's still playing out today in ways that affect the health of the whole community. And here's my other story. On March 26, 2012, people began gathering at a park here in Kansas City, what's now called Mill Creek Park, the setting of innumerable justice demonstrations over the years. This gathering was called in memory of Trayvon Martin, the Black teenager murdered in Florida the previous month. Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by a white neighborhood watch volunteer who thought he looked suspicious. And there was a stage set up in the middle of the park, which of course is located here in a highly visible, upscale, urban, almost touristy area. Local organizers had put out the call for at least a week on television, Facebook, radio, the newspapers. It was a rally to bring awareness to the crime problems in Kansas City, specifically how they affected the Black community. The mayor, who was Black, was scheduled to speak, along with several city council members and local clergy. I got there about 4 p.m. on the way home from my congregation in Lawrence and started looking around to see if anyone I knew had showed up yet. And in fact, I did see a few people I knew, but not the usual crowd of protest attendees from pro-choice demonstrations or anti-war, pro-immigration, anti-gun. That's a pretty long list. I was there because I wanted to talk about it later with our church's social justice team. It got harder and harder to see through the crowd as people of all ages continued to arrive, close to 1,000 people, as later reported, many of them dressed in Black hoodies in honor of Trayvon. The mayor was introduced from the stage and he began to speak, calling out the names of local youth lost to violence. People continued to arrive, more and more of them. The racial mix of this now huge crowd became even more skewed, almost entirely Black. 2 councilmen then addressed this crowd that seemed to me filled with sorrow and determination and outrage. A pastor offered a prayer. Then I could see what looked like a scuffle in front of that stage, and from the crowd, a Black man jumped onto the stage, grabbed the microphone from the councilman who was getting ready to speak, and before anyone could stop him, he pointed his finger out at the crowd and shouted, "Look around you, look around you. Where are the white people? They're not here because it's not their sons being murdered. And as he was quickly hustled off that stage, the crowd yelled back in acknowledgement, pain, and anger. I was there in a professional capacity, or I might well have not been there at all. What I sometimes think of as sort of an epilogue to that story might provide a glimpse of a more hopeful future. Fast forward to late May of 2020, same place, same tragedy, this time in the form of George Floyd's murder by a white police officer. Black organizers again called for the community to show up in protest. The first night, hundreds gathered for a peaceful protest, but this time the police also showed up. As night after night, more people gathered and marched through the surrounding streets. As the mayor pleaded for calm, hundreds of arrests were made, and the police chief and governor escalated the violence by sending highway patrol troopers. The sounds of low-flying helicopters, police and press and sirens filled every night. And this time, I desperately wanted to be there, and the protests were a 5-minute walk from our home. But there was COVID, and there was no vaccines, and my husband and I were in a high-risk, vulnerable category, staying out of crowds. Still, I had the evening dog walking duty, so every evening I walked over to that park. And wearing a mask, I sort of hovered around the edges as an observer. And you know what? White-looking people were everywhere taking part in that protest, so many of them younger white people, standing and marching side by side with the black and other protesters of color, even in the face of blatant police harassment. There was so much optimism at that moment. Maybe so many people finally got it, that finally our American piece of humanity was on the way to holding hands, breaking the chains, rising to freedom together. We know that has not happened. What felt like a miraculous moment of awakening was pushed back down, as it was after the end of slavery, as it was after Reconstruction, as it was after the Civil Rights Movement, as it was after Roe versus Wade, but only for a while, only until the next great eruption of the human spirit that cries out for freedom. Just as every step on the march toward freedom is resisted until people of courage and faith push through the barricades over and over, continuing to do better because we've taken seriously our commitment to knowing better. And what could be more fitting then that we rise and lift our voices together and sing, "Arise, all souls."
By one source created, one destiny ours. No part of this world is alone. All dust of the stars. Arise, all souls, into love's abundance. Weave a world that is glad and whole. Rise again. bright harmonies burn, creation forever unfolds, in more truth to learn. Arise, all souls, into love's abundance, weave a world that is glad and whole. Rise again to the promise of freedom, in wisdom arise, in struggle arise, sing the kinship of every soul. Arise, O souls, oh, now build greater justice. Let old empire fall. Awake to the work we must share, one journey for all. Arise, all souls, into love's abundance, weave a world that is glad and whole. Rise again to the promise of freedom, in wisdom arise, in struggle arise, find our future in every soul. Arise, O souls, oh.
The world aches for us to join together and bring about healing, toil for justice, and produce ever-increasing freedom. This is our calling. Go forth and act accordingly.
Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom.